There's no question that large-scale climate engineering is untested and dangerous. We've mostly thought about sulfur, and there's a lot of good reasons to think about sulfur. Nevertheless, there might be some good reasons to think about alumina. It turns out, first of all, there's been a lot of work on the environmental consequences of alumina in the stratosphere, because it's in shuttle exhaust. Make very high quality, you can do this in just a jet in a very simple way, make high quality alumina particles just by spraying alumina vapor out, which oxidize.
Hi, my name is James Lee. I'm from Sumter, South Carolina. I'm a citizen. Why is the EPA claiming that 6 greenhouse gases emitted from jet planes are a threat to human health under the Clean Air Act while doing nothing to address ongoing lawsuits over leaded aviation gasoline or the real health concerns of stakeholders worldwide? Cancer-causing heavy metals in fuels and their additives and aviation-induced cloudiness. You, the EPA, claim the authority to regulate aviation emissions under the Clean Air Act, a law that should protect us from the aforementioned poisonous pollution. However, the definition of pollution is being perverted to mean climate change gases in what can only be called a violation of the spirit of the law.
Good morning. My name is Amanda Bays, and I live in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today. For the past 5 years, I have documented aircraft emitting trails across the sky. I have taken hundreds of videos and thousands of photographs of these persisting emissions. Many of the aircraft I have witnessed appear to be spraying something into the atmosphere. Uneasy with my observations, I wanted to know exactly what was causing the aircraft to leave visible trails that did not dissipate. I reached out to local, state, and federal government agencies for information and assistance. What I experienced was disillusioning, to say the least. When I called the EPA, I was told that the FAA handled aircraft emissions. When I called the FAA, they told me to call the EPA. I was shuttled from office to office with no agency ever accepting responsibility or accountability. My calls were not returned, nor were my concerns ever addressed. The sage advice I finally received from the EPA was to hire a plane and do my own testing. This was especially disheartening since I had been led to believe that the Environmental Protection Agency was the ultimate protector of the environment.
All but the willfully ignorant know our skies have changed dramatically over the last few decades. The dark blue skies of our childhood have been replaced with a milky white haze, crisscrossed with fast expanding persistent contrails, stretching from horizon to horizon and spreading out to cover the sky. These trails can stretch for thousands of miles and can be seen by anyone visiting nasa.gov. These trails persist regardless of altitude, temperature, humidity, or other atmospheric conditions. Persistent contrails used to be rare, but have now become an everyday phenomenon all over the world. If physics hasn't changed, what has? So what makes these trails form, persist for hours, and stretch thousands of miles? Which condensation nuclei are they forming on, and are these harmful to human health? Geoengineers propose spraying tens of millions of tons of reflective particles into the atmosphere in an attempt to reflect sunlight back into space and thereby reduce global warming. This is known as solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, or albedo modification. This process, patented by defense contractor Raytheon, is quite simple. Tiny particles sprayed from jets would act as condensation nuclei, attracting atmospheric water vapor to form persistent artificially nucleated contrails, which would then spread out and form artificial cirrus cloud cover. When geoengineers discuss solar radiation management in public, the only substances they say they'd consider spraying are sulfates or sulfuric acid. However, their own literature concludes that sulfates have limited effectiveness and that highly toxic nanoparticles of aluminum and barium should be used instead. And when confronted, they doggedly refuse to address the human health impact of their proposals.
How can we have
faith in organizations such as yourselves to take care of things like that when you yourself, as we spoke last time, discussed putting pathogens in clouds?
I happen to be a reviewer reviewing a paper right now on health impacts of solar geoengineering that is suggesting that many thousands of deaths would be caused by the aerosols, but small relative to what the sulfates are.
Not what you said. But my concern is, why isn't there more emphasis on the human health impacts? And does it affect the credibility of the panel?
The question is, why are we looking more at health impacts of geoengineering?
And not just sulfates, the other substances such as aluminum, barium, and strontium.
Considering putting into the atmosphere. So the reason we're concerned about global warming is because of the health impacts. Global warming, as Michael pointed out earlier, has a lot of negative effects on the health of people around the world. And so
third leading cause of death being respiratory failure now?
I have attended and participated in various high-level climate change and climate engineering conferences. With respect to this hearing on the proposed finding of greenhouse gases from aircraft cause or contribute to air pollution that may reasonably be anticipated to endanger public health and welfare, the major component, 95% of greenhouse gas, is water vapour, together with other constituents from exhaust or ejected particulate matter from aircraft form contrails, contrail cirrus, haziness, and cloud blankets, which certainly do affect changes to the weather, altering rainfall, altering temperatures, inducing droughts, reducing frosts, etc., and ultimately affecting climate change. When the planes were grounded following 9/11 and later in the UK in 2010, there were obviously no contrails. The sky cleared of clouds and natural clear blue sky returned, confirming aviation is affecting cloud cover. According to various investigations, such as the 1998 Subsonic Contrail and Clouds Effects Special Study, they have noted that apart from water and CO2, there are metal particles including zinc, aluminium and titanium, also soot, sulfates, etc., found in the exhaust plumes, contributing as nuclei for ice crystals to form contrails. A 2010 study for the Wright-Patterson Air Force Research Laboratory entitled Nano-Sized Aluminium Altered Immune Function opens the abstract with this sentence: on the basis of their uses in jet fuels, munitions, and the most likely scenario for aluminium nanoparticle exposure is inhalation.
The latest research casts doubts on the IPCC's contrail assumptions and requires serious consideration when addressing the real climate change impact of aviation. High-altitude metals and cirrus cloud condensation nuclei are likely coming from leaded avgas and jet exhaust. Contrails are making cirrus clouds, and small changes in atmospheric metal have large impacts on cirrus cloud creation. Cirrus clouds trap heat and are likely to have a greater climate change impact than CO2. Finally, aviation-induced cloudiness endangers future growth in solar energy, affects tourism and spending, and is projected to make terrestrial astronomy impossible by 2050. Geoengineering scientists, NASA, NOAA, FAA, USDA, DOE, and international corporate partners are discussing the use of biofuels and sulfur-doped jet fuels for contrail control. This cirrus cloud seeding with bismuth tri-iodide to melt these clouds away. The EPA should be directly involved in these discussions.
Look at the alumina or sulfuric acid functions, which are the mass-specific backscatter, so a measure of radiative forcing, and in fact I have it in watts per square meter per megaton. And those things fall off as the particles get larger. But even more important, the fall speed rises quite rapidly in this regime. And so as particles stick together and get large, they fall out of the stratosphere very quickly. And so particles that are too large are much less effective per unit mass.
For several years, I electronically reported on airplane pollution using the Environmental Violations Form on EPA's website, epa.gov/tips. It was referred to me by an ASRC federal contractor working for the EPA. I have always included my contact information on the tip report and identified specific aircraft that can easily be traced. No one from the EPA has investigated any of my formally filed complaints. Since I became interested in the possible dangers of chemical spraying in the environment, I have contacted the Virginia Pollution Control Board, National Weather Service, Oceana and Dam Neck military bases, NOAA, NASA, the Department of Defense, Brookhaven National Laboratory, the Department of Energy, the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, the Health Department, the Department of Travel, countless federal agents and operators, the Virginia Beach Police Department, and even the White House, all to no avail. To date, no one from any agency has investigated my complaints. I was told to talk to my local representatives. Every agency I contacted responded to my reports by telling me that I was seeing condensation from engine exhaust. Aircraft engines do emit water vapor, of course, but vapor that quickly dissipates. What I was witnessing was persistent and long-lasting. How can anyone reasonably conclude that a particular aircraft emission is merely a contrail without testing it? That is both unscientific and irresponsible.
I collected rainwater in clean glass bowls on the roof of my San Francisco apartment building on April 5th, 6,000 miles downwind from the nearest factory, power plant, refinery, freeway, quarry or mine. I sent it to a NELAP-certified lab, and they recorded barium at a staggering 160 micrograms per liter. Less than 1 gram will kill an adult human. An earlier test of rainwater collected in January 14 recorded aluminum at 190 micrograms per liter. I submit both these rainwater tests for the record. San Francisco's air should be pristine. We get prevailing winds off the Pacific Ocean. Why is it left to concerned citizens to pay for our own rainwater analysis? And why did EPA stop publishing data on airborne aluminum back in 2002? Let me take this opportunity to formally submit a Freedom of Information request for EPA to release the historical results of all metal tests in our air and rainwater from the 1980s to present. I've recorded hundreds of time-lapse videos showing the progression of these persistent contrails since 2011. Thousands of others worldwide have also documented the alarming increase of these persistent contrails. Your mandate is to protect the environment, especially the air we breathe. I wouldn't expect you to admit the existence of a program as covert as the Manhattan Project, even one blatantly obvious to an increasingly aware and outraged populace. But when a geoengineering program is causing millions of premature deaths a year, you must do more than pass the buck back and forth between other three-letter agencies. Do your job. History will judge you on your actions or inaction.
Interestingly, when one begins to research the history of weather and climate modification, it is surprising how far up the power structure the desire for developing a large-scale weather and climate modification program was, from Presidents Eisenhower, JFK, Johnson, onwards, with a high priority put on these possibilities. The Johnson administration was using weather modification for geopolitical leverage with India and Pakistan in 1967. Would we be naive to think that the interest just went away because of the NMOD treaty? Look up Owning the Weather 2025. In conclusion, pollutants from aircraft that need prohibition, such as sulfates or the use of any nanoparticles which can travel via the air from a source of combustion into life organisms, is causing serious negative health impacts to many forms of life. This needs to be tightly regulated and ultimately stopped. The notion that the climate science is settled is often repeated over and over by interested stakeholders, such as those looking for lucrative funding in the burgeoning climate change arena, be it academics, politicians or entrepreneurs looking for success or to get rich, or more darkly, hoping to implement a one-world government system. Climate has always had natural variability and weather extremes. However, these days, some weather extremes can be stimulated with technology. Is it appropriate to reassess the anthropogenic global warming theory and replace it with climate change is man-made? by using covert weather and climate modification technology known as geoengineering for geopolitical ends. We do not need to be scientists to observe the sky and see the obvious negative effects aviation is having and research the spiralling health impacts. Just start looking up and wake up. We do not consent to the use of weather and climate modification or the despotic New World Order. God bless and peace for all.
And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids.